There's a moment when you walk into a room and something shifts. Not because you announced yourself, not because you demanded attention, but because your very presence creates a disturbance in the social atmosphere. People lean in slightly. Conversations pause. Eyes follow your movement with a hunger they can't quite explain. That's not charisma you're witnessing. That's envy in its purest form. And Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. Most people think jealousy is about what you have, your success, your relationships, your possessions. But Machiavelli knew the truth. Real envy isn't triggered by what you own. It's triggered by what you withhold, by what others can sense but never quite access, by the gap between what they see and what they'll never understand about you. You felt it before. That burning sensation when someone seems to glide through life effortlessly while you struggle. When they speak and people listen with an intensity that borders on obsession. When they remain calm in situations that would shatter your composure. That's not luck. That's strategy. And it's been weaponized for centuries by those who understand the psychology of desire. Because here's what most people miss. Jealousy isn't an emotion you create in others by showing off. It's an emotion you trigger by creating scarcity. Not scarcity of things, but scarcity of access. To your thoughts, to your approval, to your emotional availability. When people can't fully read you, can't predict you, can't control their effect on you, they become obsessed with understanding what makes you different. Machiavelli didn't just write about political power. He decoded human nature itself. And what he discovered was this. The most envied people aren't the loudest, the richest, or even the most successful. They're the most unreachable. The people who exist just slightly beyond everyone else's emotional grasp. Close enough to be real, distant enough to be mysterious. Think about the people in your life who create that feeling in you. That mixture of admiration and frustration. They're not performing for attention. They're not trying to impress. They simply carry themselves with a certainty that makes everyone else question their own foundation. They speak when they choose to. They're present when it serves them. They give approval sparingly, but when they do, it feels like gold. That's not arrogance. That's positioning. And positioning is everything in the game of human psychology. Because people don't envy what they understand. They envy what confuses them. What feels just out of reach. What seems to operate by rules they haven't learned yet. Most people approach social situations like they're auditioning. They perform. They please. They adjust their energy to match the room. They seek validation, approval, inclusion, and in doing so, they make themselves completely predictable. Easy to read, safe to dismiss. But the person who triggers envy does the opposite. They make the room adjust to them without ever demanding it. How? Through what Machiavelli would call strategic opacity. You don't hide who you are. You simply refuse to explain yourself. You don't justify your choices. You don't defend your boundaries. You don't seek permission for your decisions. You exist with such quiet certainty that others begin to wonder what you know that they don't. This creates a psychological vacuum. And human nature abhors a vacuum. When people can't fill in the blanks about you, their imagination runs wild. They start projecting strength, mystery, hidden depths onto your silence. They begin to assume you're operating from a position of power they can't see. And that assumption becomes your reality in their minds. But here's where most people misunderstand the entire concept. They think being mysterious means being cold, distant, or antisocial. That's not mystery. That's just being unavailable. True mystery is being selectively available. It's showing warmth when you choose to, engaging when it serves your purpose, being present when the moment calls for it, but never as a default, never as a guarantee. The person who triggers envy doesn't shut everyone out. They let people in, but only so far. They share stories, but never the full picture. They laugh, but you're never sure what they're really thinking. They're kind, but their kindness feels earned rather than automatic. This creates something far more dangerous than distance. It creates hope. And hope is the fuel of obsession. Because when someone gives you glimpses of depth, moments of connection, flashes of approval, but never the complete experience, your mind becomes addicted to solving the puzzle. You start analyzing their words, their expressions, their choices. You begin to measure your own worth against their reactions. You find yourself adjusting your behavior, hoping to unlock more access to whatever it is they're protecting. That's the Machiavellian insight. Envy isn't created by showing people what they can't have. It's created by showing them what they might be able to earn, but only if they prove themselves worthy. The maybe is more powerful than the yes or the no, because maybe keeps people engaged, invested, constantly working for something they can never quite secure. This is why the most envied people seem to live by different rules. They don't chase opportunities. Opportunities come to them. They don't beg for respect. Respect is offered freely. They don't work for approval. People work for theirs. Not through manipulation or games, but through sheer psychological positioning. They've made themselves the prize rather than the pursuer. And the beautiful paradox is this: the less you need from others, the more they want to give you. The less you react to their provocations, the more they respect your composure. The less you explain yourself, the more they assume you must be right. Your restraint becomes their fascination. Your boundaries become their challenge. Your indifference becomes their obsession. But this isn't about becoming emotionless or detached. It's about becoming selective. Selective with your energy. Selective with your reactions. Selective with your availability. When everything about you feels earned rather than given. When your attention feels rare rather than common. When your approval feels valuable rather than automatic, you've shifted the entire dynamic. People start watching how you move through the world. They notice how you handle pressure, how you respond to success, how you react to setbacks. They study your patterns, trying to decode the system that makes you seem so unshakable. And the more they study, the more they realize they're studying someone who doesn't seem to need their validation to exist. That realization is what triggers the deepest form of envy. Not the surface jealousy of possessions or achievements, but the profound envy of someone who appears to be genuinely self-contained. Someone who seems to have found something internal that makes them immune to the external chaos that consumes everyone else. This is where Machiavelli's understanding becomes crucial. He knew that power isn't about what you can take from others. It's about what you don't need from them. The person who doesn't need constant validation can't be controlled through withholding it. The person who doesn't need approval can't be manipulated through criticism. The person who doesn't need inclusion can't be threatened with exclusion. When you operate from this position of psychological independence, something shifts in how others perceive you. You're no longer just another person competing for the same resources, the same attention, the same validation. You become someone who seems to have access to a different game entirely. A game where the rules favor composure over chaos, depth over surface, quality over quantity. And that's when the envy really begins. Because people can handle others having more money, more success, even more talent. But they struggle to handle others seeming to need less, to be bothered by less, to be moved by less. It suggests a level of internal development that makes their own emotional reactivity feel immature by comparison. The person who can remain calm during arguments, who can stay focused during distractions, who can maintain their center during social storms, isn't just enviable. They're intimidating, because they represent what everyone else wishes they could be, but hasn't learned how to become. This is where most people make their fatal mistake. They try to build this psychological positioning through external displays. They buy expensive things, post carefully curated photos, name-drop connections, brag about achievements. But Machiavelli would laugh at this approach, because external validation seeking is the opposite of what creates genuine envy. It's the behavior of someone who's still playing the approval game, just with bigger stakes. Real psychological positioning comes from internal shifts that others can sense but never quite identify. It's the way you hold silence when others rush to fill empty space. It's how you listen without the desperate need to be heard. It's your ability to be present in conversations without performing for them. People feel this difference, even if they can't articulate it. The envied person doesn't try to prove their worth. They simply act from a place where their worth is already established in their own mind. They don't need to convince anyone of their value because they're not seeking external confirmation of what they already know internally. This creates a gravitational pull that's impossible to fake and equally impossible to ignore. But here's the deeper layer. This isn't just about individual interactions. It's about how you move through entire social ecosystems. Most people enter rooms seeking something: connection, validation, opportunities, entertainment. The person who triggers envy enters rooms complete. They're not there to get anything. They're there because they chose to be. And that choice feels different to everyone watching. When you're not seeking, people sense it immediately. Your energy doesn't reach out desperately. Your attention doesn't scatter, looking for the most important person to impress. Your conversation doesn't adjust based on who's listening. You exist in the space with such quiet authority that others begin organizing themselves around your presence without you asking them to. This is what Machiavelli understood about human psychology. People are naturally drawn to those who seem to need them least, not because they enjoy being rejected, but because they interpret self-sufficiency as strength. And strength, especially quiet strength, creates a magnetic field that pulls others into orbit. The person who doesn't chase approval finds approval chasing them. The person who doesn't seek attention becomes the center of it. The person who doesn't need validation becomes the source others seek it from. It's the ultimate reversal of social dynamics, and it happens not through manipulation, but through genuine internal development. Think about how this plays out in practical terms. While others are networking desperately, trading favors and flattery, you're having real conversations with people who interest you. While others are performing their success, you're quietly building something meaningful. While others are reacting to every slight and provocation, you're moving with such consistent purpose that drama seems to bounce off you. This consistency becomes your signature. People start recognizing your patterns. They notice that you don't get rattled by the same things that destabilize others. They see that your mood doesn't fluctuate based on external circumstances. They observe that your self-respect doesn't depend on their opinions. And gradually, they begin to wonder what it would feel like to live with that kind of internal stability. That wondering becomes wanting. And wanting becomes envy. Not the bitter, resentful kind, but the aspirational kind. The kind that makes people want to be around you, hoping some of that composure will rub off. The kind that makes them study your responses, trying to learn the secret of your unshakability. But here's what they don't realize. There is no secret technique. There's only the daily practice of choosing your internal state over external circumstances, of responding rather than reacting, of acting from intention rather than impulse, of building a life so aligned with your values that you don't need others' approval to feel good about your choices. This is why Machiavellian psychology is so powerful. It's not about tricks or tactics. It's about becoming someone who genuinely doesn't need what everyone else is desperately seeking. And when you no longer need external validation, something remarkable happens. You become incredibly attractive to those who are still trapped in that cycle. The psychological positioning creates itself. You don't have to work to seem mysterious when you're genuinely focused on things that matter to you. You don't have to pretend to be unbothered when you've developed real emotional resilience. You don't have to act confident when you've built genuine competence in areas you care about. This authenticity is what makes the envy so profound. People can sense when someone is performing strength versus when someone has actually developed it. They can feel the difference between manufactured mystery and genuine depth. They can detect the gap between projected confidence and earned self-assurance, and that detection triggers something primal. A recognition that they're in the presence of someone who has solved problems they're still struggling with. Someone who has developed capacities they wish they had. Someone who has found a way to be genuinely content with themselves while they're still seeking that contentment through others. The envy becomes a mirror, reflecting back their own emotional dependence, their own need for validation, their own lack of internal foundation. And rather than driving them away, it draws them closer. Because being around someone who has what you want feels better than being around people who want the same things you do. This is the ultimate Machiavellian insight. The person who needs least from the social game wins it entirely. Not through competition or manipulation, but through transcendence. By developing something internal that makes external validation feel nice to receive, but unnecessary to seek. When you reach this level of psychological development, envy becomes inevitable. Not because you're trying to trigger it, but because you represent something rare in a world full of people still chasing what you've already found within yourself. And this brings us to the final transformation. The moment when you stop trying to become enviable and simply become inevitable. Because true Machiavellian power isn't about creating jealousy. It's about creating a presence so magnetic that envy becomes a byproduct of your very existence. You see, most people think they want to be envied because they believe it will make them feel powerful. But Machiavelli understood something deeper. The person who is genuinely enviable doesn't even notice the envy they create. They're too focused on their own path, their own growth, their own purpose to be concerned with others' reactions to their progress. This is where the psychology becomes almost mystical. When you stop performing for envy and start living for excellence, something shifts in the atmosphere around you. People begin to sense that you're operating from a different frequency entirely. Not better than them, but different. Like you've discovered a radio station they didn't know existed. Your conversations carry more weight because you're not filling silence with noise. Your presence feels more substantial because you're not diluting it with desperate energy. Your attention becomes more valuable because you're not giving it away carelessly. You've become economical with the most precious resources you have: your time, your energy, your emotional investment. And economy creates scarcity. Scarcity creates desire. Desire creates envy. But this isn't manufactured scarcity. This is the natural result of someone who has learned to value themselves appropriately, who understands that their peace is more important than their popularity, that their growth matters more than their image. The envied person has made a fundamental shift in their relationship with themselves. They've stopped negotiating their worth based on external feedback. They've stopped adjusting their identity to match others' expectations. They've stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world. This internal revolution creates an external transformation that others can feel but can't quite explain. When you walk into rooms like you belong there, not because you need their acceptance, but because you accept yourself, the energy changes. When you speak like your words have value, not because you're seeking validation, but because you validated yourself, people listen differently. When you move through challenges like they're puzzles to solve rather than threats to survive, others begin to wonder what you know that they don't. But here's the beautiful paradox. The more genuinely unbothered you become by others' opinions, the more their opinions seem to favor you. The less you need their approval, the more freely they give it. The less you chase their attention, the more it gravitates toward you. You've broken the cycle of neediness that keeps most people trapped in emotional poverty. This is why Machiavelli's insights remain so powerful centuries later. He understood that human psychology operates on principles that don't change. People are drawn to those who seem to have solved the puzzle of contentment. They envy those who appear to need less while somehow receiving more. They're fascinated by those who can remain centered while everyone else spins in emotional chaos. The person who triggers this level of envy has become what everyone else is still trying to become: self-possessed, self-directed, self-sufficient. Not in an antisocial way, but in a way that makes their social connections feel chosen rather than desperate, intentional rather than compulsive, valuable rather than necessary. Think about how this transforms every interaction. When you're not seeking anything from conversations, you can actually listen. When you're not performing for approval, you can be authentic. When you're not afraid of judgment, you can be honest. This creates connections that feel different to others, deeper, more real, more valuable. And valuable connections create valuable opportunities. Valuable opportunities create valuable outcomes. Valuable outcomes create a life that others genuinely envy, not because you're trying to make them jealous, but because you've built something worth envying. This is the final lesson Machiavelli would teach about envy. Don't try to make people jealous. Try to make yourself genuinely worth being jealous of. Not through accumulation or achievement, but through the kind of internal development that creates external magnetism. When you've done the work to become truly self-contained, emotionally stable, and purposefully directed, envy becomes inevitable. Not because you're triggering it, but because you're embodying something rare, something others recognize they want, but haven't yet learned how to develop. You become living proof that there's another way to exist in the world. A way that doesn't require constant validation, endless approval seeking, or desperate performance for attention. A way that seems almost effortless from the outside, but represents years of internal work on the inside. And that's when you realize the ultimate truth about Machiavellian psychology. The most powerful position isn't making others want what you have. It's becoming someone who no longer needs what they're still desperately seeking. That transformation doesn't just trigger envy. It transcends it entirely, because when you've genuinely found contentment within yourself, others' envy becomes irrelevant. You're not playing their game anymore. You're not even playing your own game. You've become the game itself. And that's a level of power that no external validation could ever provide. That's how you make anyone insanely jealous without trying. By becoming so genuinely complete within yourself that trying becomes unnecessary. By developing so much internal value that external validation becomes optional. By building such a strong foundation that others' opinions become interesting observations rather than emotional requirements. This is Machiavelli's ultimate insight. True power isn't about controlling others. It's about mastering yourself so completely that control becomes irrelevant. When you reach that level, envy isn't something you create. It's something you inspire. And inspiration, unlike manipulation, creates lasting influence that benefits everyone it touches.